Sure. My name is James, and let's see. I guess last week, I sort of what I remember most vividly is sort of having this moment of disagreement or conflict or something with the text, and it was saying something about how sort of true self and all these things, and I sort of rejected that at first, but then actually something that you said, Kurt, was very helpful there. You sort of looked at another part of the text where he was talking about what he was actually meaning by that in terms of sort of seeing connectedness more, and sort of the truth about the self is that there's sort of this. And that was much more plausible. I felt like I was just missing part of what was actually going on. So I think that was a helpful realization for me there.
My name's Irene. I missed half the class this time. I don't have any comments on it.
My name's Ed. The passage discussing, I guess, ego and self-image and how we project negative qualities within ourselves on images of others, and that's what's the cause of hate. I found that really gripping. I didn't talk too much about it last week, but I thought about that a lot this past week.
Yep. My name's Jim Chubach. I was here last week. I think one of the things that I enjoyed in the last meeting that jumped out was there was a lot of people who were younger than I in the room, and I really enjoyed them. And I'm just looking forward to. And I have one on my tin roll.
I was virtual last week thanks to Scare in our office. Apparently the book that I purchased was the pamphlet. It was only about 26 pages long, and I was confused for it all the way last week. I kept remembering, I'm not seeing it. I'm missing something. So yeah, this is particularly when I have support. I should be up to date.
My name's Rachel. I was on my virtual last week. I remember enjoying or feeling some sort of connection to like the passage about like having a mask that you put on with other people. And I'll probably reread that again to try and remember what that was connecting with. But yeah.
I'm Matthew. I was also virtual last week. And yeah, I thought the math chapter was interesting as well. Which I mean, I'm just copying Rachel's answer.
Good morning again. My name is Kurt. I'm on adult religious education. And I'll repeat what I said last week. So it's not so much the insight from last week, but it's still what feels most resonant for me, which is I'm really excited for the opportunity to sort of like dig into and sort of vocalize and hear from everyone about their experience spiritually and with Quakerism. We don't necessarily build that into every single week. And so I'm really excited about just hearing from folks about those things. Folks walk in, we were just doing introductions by saying your name, and we still need to do the folks online, but saying our name, and if you were here last week, maybe one thing that stood out for you or stayed with you, or what you're looking forward to getting out of Quakerism 101. So either the folks who haven't introduced themselves yet in the room or the folks online, if you want to chime in with your name and what stood out to you last week or what you're looking forward to in Quakerism 101. Online want to introduce themselves?
Hi, my name is Paul Pierce. I was not here last week. What I'm hoping to get from this series of talks is, well, I'd say really anything I didn't know about Quakerism before. That's it. And I'm flexible, so there's no one thing I'm looking for.
That helps make it easy. I hope. We went around. Do either of you want to introduce yourselves? Okay. I thought we could get started by reading. It starts at the bottom of page 30, what God means today. And I'm wondering, it's a long paragraph and then followed by a short paragraph that says, so God. I'm wondering if someone would be willing to read those two paragraphs. Good.
God means today, starting there.
Yes, please.
There are many ways of thinking and feeling about God, of course. Today, the variety is vast and bewildering, but I am thinking of a very fundamental meaning of the word, which we should all be able to recognize and accept. It is the sense of God. It is the sense of God as the ultimate reality of our life, whatever that might happen to be. We are not referring to a particular being that we could imagine or describe, but to whatever reality, it might be that lies behind or beneath all the particular realities we know of. To make sense of this idea, we have to become aware of something in ourselves that points in that direction, possibly a lack of something we need but cannot identify, or a longing for something that we could provide a basis or a meaning for our life, that could provide a basis for meaning for our life. It is not so much a sense of God as that word is commonly understood, as a sense of God, the sense of a God-shaped home. I may have no idea what it is. It may even be a huge void or an absence, but I may have a very clear sense that without it, and without a positive relation to it, my life is incomplete and unsatisfactory.
So God in this sense is not an intellectual idea, an hypothesis that answers a query about how the world works or how the world began. It is a spiritual idea that answers our own inner longing for reality, our deep personal need for meaning and security and identity, but which nothing else, nothing in the world around us, seems to be able to answer. So what might this reality be? So last week we talked about masks, our awareness of ourselves, silence, our cherished images, breaking free of those things. Now we get to the God word. What stands out to us from what we just read?
But I believe that God is way beyond what I can know, and God is everywhere, not out there, but out there and everywhere, in there, out there, all around.
Thing that we can't identify. So, and kind of our ego and our hubris, we want to identify and give names and provide full structure to all of nature. But there are some things that are just impossible, try as we might, to understand. And it's our realization that there are things beyond our understanding that is God. And that's the part that we need to address through a spiritual manner as opposed to just an intellectual pursuit.
I have a really connected with like sort of the one of those last few sentences, like I may have no idea what it is. It may be a big void or an absence, but I may have a very clear sense that without it, without a positive relationship to it, my life is incomplete and unsatisfactory. That spoke to me, I think, because I've been kind of like away from religion and church for a while. But I had the sense, like I still like I considered myself agnostic for a long time. Because it's like I don't know, but I feel like there's something there and it's meaningful to me. And so, as I approach Quakerism and learn more about it, like I think that like that's that sense that's bringing me here. So there's something important that I need.
Did anyone have any reaction to the sense of a God-shaped hole? Did that feel resonant, or did that feel different than how we might describe what maybe the author's getting at?
And a God-shaped hole. I just feel like there's something in every person. I don't know if it comes from out in the cosmos or, it's a piece of God and we all have it. And when we die, it goes back to wherever it came from. And I guess I think of that as the saying, we're children of God, so.
And it was the sentence you were discussing, where it's like, I have a very clear sense that without a positive relationship to it, my life is incomplete and unsatisfactory. And as someone who also was identifying as agnostic for a long time, that really challenged me, because that's kind of the agnostic approach, is that it's fine to not interact with God. But like you, I just wanted to echo, like, recently I found that it is unsatisfying in some way. So maybe that's kind of today.
I find myself wondering the decision. So, like, to some degree, this is a redefinition of God that I don't think is, totally unique to Quakerism, but uses a word, capital G God, that means something somewhat different for most people who use it. And so it's this very specific decision to keep that word as a label for a new thing. And for me, I have such strong associations with that word of being connected to dogma, to very specific things, that I have a really hard time hearing it and not hearing that. And so I guess my like kind of skeptical question here is, why use a proper noun? Why make it sound like it is a being through its label, if that's not how we're defining it?
I kind of coming on to what you said. For me, there's a kind of language I use. We call it God language, right? And it's language. It's linguistic, and it's at the boundary of what really can't be talked about, what can't be described, and I think. I choose to fall into using that language because as something that can't be described, really, we still try to talk about it anyway. To me, that's what messages are to me. We're trying to talk about what's essentially unspeakable, but we're giving words to it. And I think there can be a lot of inevitable misunderstanding. When I use that language, I'm not talking about something that I believe in. I'm just talking around that indescribable underpinning of reality. There's a friend of mine Lee was brought up Quaker, and considered himself an atheist. Used to come to meetings occasionally, and one morning I gave a message that was used a lot of very traditional terms, and he left after the message, and we haven't spoken since. Several years ago. I mean, I think that I probably should reach out to him, but he was offended that someone like me, who he sees as a rational person and all that, would be talking that way. And because I don't see any contradiction. It's just there is that which we cannot speak about, but we try anyway. That just.
I'm oscillating on this between this. I really identifying with this argument that there is this sort of sense of this absence and this lack, and that's sort of pointing us towards some deeper spiritual reality. Between that sort of sense and I guess just maybe what you might call like a more sort of tragic view of the world, but we have this absence and this lack, and that's just because we're creatures built with this sad absence and lack in us, and there's really nothing it's pointing us towards. I don't know how to resolve that, those two sides of it.
One thing I wonder about is I see things, people who say they believe in God, and then people who believe in science. Well, where do I go? Because I believe in both, science and God, and I feel like, what's happening? I'm getting torn apart.
I guess as a fellow scientist, I think the way that I don't know, I'm still navigating and approaching it. I find that the more I learn about the world, the more it breaks the rules that we try to draw around it. And so, and then even as I describe everything and put names to everything, it's like I'm a botanist, so there's a name for everything. Trying to figure everything out. But I'll be telling everyone about evergreens and conifers and how they always hold on to their leaves, but except for bald cypress, they drop their leaves in the fall. And it's most plants have all of the male and female parts to them. It's except for this tree, it only has male parts, and then this one only has female parts. And so it's the world is so complex, and I think the thing that helps me navigate it is just expecting complexity, and that expecting complexity then leads me to as I am approaching my spiritual life, you're saying, trying to circumvent, you're using the words you have to try and describe something that's indescribable. It's if you're expecting complexity while also trying to describe it, then you're just we're all kind of using words to circumvent that, I guess, God-shaped hole in the void that we're trying to define the edges of, but every single time we think we put a circle around it, it's bigger, more complex than we thought it was before.
So it's the exception that makes the rule.
Yeah.
And so the logistician Gödel, is a German logistician, came up with the incompleteness theory in mathematics, which states that, I won't go into all of it, but states that regardless of what kind of system you have to explain, in his case, math, but Hofstadter later said the world, no matter what system you have, it will be incomplete, meaning you cannot explain everything. And it will also be inconsistent, which means it will tell lots. And this is every possible language that humans can construct will always fall under this system. And Hofstadter, talking about Gödel, also applied this to humanity in a way, kind of maybe the similar sorts of ideas that we're talking about God now, where regardless of what we can come up with within our language and express, we still cannot express every possible truth, and we will still express lies. So maybe God is the parts of the world that our language can't touch and interact with.
I think in a way, actually, trying to describe God in words is really almost as difficult as drawing a picture of God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Was I forget who, but there was a theologian who said, God is that of which nothing greater can be said. Which reminds me of what you were saying here. That's, yeah, that's definitely something I quite understand. The other thing that I thought of, I think I mentioned last week that I grew up Catholic, and so one of the things that the God-shaped whole language reminds me of is Saint Augustine said, our hearts were made for you, O God, and they are restless until they rest in you. I think what we've been doing has been a super great example of what is said on the very next page. I'm wondering if I can get two volunteers for the next two paragraphs on page 32. One person to read, you see what has happened, and then the next person to read, if there is a Quaker way.
You see what has happened. A spiritual search has been turned into an intellectual inquiry. It is, of course, much easier to deal with this ultimate question of life if we debate ideas of what the ultimate reality might be. It is also very interesting, but we have to say it is evasive and eventually unsatisfactory. The debate avoids and evades the question which lies at the base of it. The anxiety at being so alone or vulnerable in the world, or the feeling of awe that the world exists at all. And that is often how we cope with anxiety and awe, is it not? Instead of exploring the feeling and finding what it might tell us about our situation in life, we grasp at something that seems to offer an immediate solution. Here is a revelation from God. These are the facts of science.
If there's a Quaker way of dealing with this question, I would say that it's the advice to stay with the feeling, stay with the anxiety and awe. Be true to what you experience and let the experience itself point the way through. That is the advice that Quakers too have to heed. I can say. Like others, they too can grasp at ideas which seem to resolve a worry or a wonder, but which are not really grounded in experience. They can say, for example, it is essential to believe in God as the ultimate power in the world, and Quakerism is not thinkable without this belief. Or they may say, on the contrary, there's a minority of Quakers who do this, and it is important to believe that there is no God, that there is no belief is necessary for spiritual development. So surprisingly, perhaps, we have our own quiet version of the God debate that is taking place in the world around us. I hope to show in what follows that people on both sides of the debate are rather missing the point.
So that advice. The advice to stay with the feeling, stay with the anxiety and awe. Be true to what you experience and let the experience itself point the way.
This is I guess, my own personal experience. A lot of times I've tried to overcome anxiety or self-doubt by filling in the void, by doing more, by being on the internet for longer. And when I come here, it's the only time I'm not on the internet for like however long I'm here. It's just a time to not do more and just let more happen to me.
I sometimes ask myself, well, which experience are we talking about here? You know, day with the way I feel when I first wake up in the morning, I would probably stay in bed all day. there's an existential anxiety. For the last 10 or 15 years, I wake up every day thinking about environmental destruction and how much longer any of us have. And then, you know, and then there's my personal life, and I think about am I going to stay healthy enough and with enough marbles while these children still need me? You know, I mean, other things, you know, just all these other things. And then what happens is that immediately it's almost like a physical thing. You start moving around and doing your morning stuff, and it kind of dispels into becoming a functioning, you know, functioning adult. But I wonder what, and so what I've tried to do over the last few years, and Quakerism has really informed me, is hold back all those concerns that I first wake up with, still be able to function and still be able to sit here and feel, as Dante said, nel lago del cor compunto, composed within the lake of my heart. Still be able to hold all those things.
I'm like backwards that way. I feel rotten the day before at the end, and then when I wake up in the morning, it's like a new dawn, a new day, you know.
Learning to like sit with it, or not sit with it, but like accept the anxieties that you have as you move through your day. Because I often will try and be like, oh, I can solve each of the individual anxieties, but then sometimes the anxieties are too big, like climate change. It's like, how can I can't solve that right now, and so I can either sit and continue to be anxious, or it's accepting like I am both anxious about this and I have to do other things. And like the anxiety of like, if God exists, or if I'm doing enough to speak to him in the, or like them, or the it, or whatever is connecting everything, or just the energy that we're all feeling, whatever that is. Sometimes that itself is a huge anxiety. And so like sitting with it and still moving on rather than trying to solve it, I guess is also a similar way of like accepting that I'm anxious about it and going about my day anyway, or doing some small things about it. And
It's kind of like interesting that he's like anxiety and awe, and like the way I interpret that is sort of like meaning like things outside like your preferences, and sort of like throughout our life, like we have points at which we're unsatisfied, and then he's saying like we need to just exist within those points, and then by accepting that we're unsatisfied, we can be satisfied, which is sort of paradoxical. That jumps out to me too. I kind of I like having sort of more intellectual, sort of philosophical debates about things, and I want that to be part of my spiritual life. But this is sort of discouraging that to some extent, or saying that it's really kind of avoiding the more essential way of doing that. And I sort of am curious what place there still is, or is there still a place for that sort of way of engaging with religion?
One curiosity I have about this idea of staying with the feeling is that it seemed like from last week that there's sort of a path, like there's, you know, you're not just accepting necessarily the feeling. Like the staying with the feeling doesn't mean that you don't expect any sort of journey towards a different feeling or different flavor of that feeling, or some new version of it. But I guess I'm curious, what is this really like an in the moment piece of advice, or is the idea that staying with the feeling is kind of part of being on some path as a seeker?
Me, when I think of what he's saying, what he writes, and sort of to your point as well, like I think I, in my life, have often been far more oriented towards an accomplishment than the journey towards the accomplishment. Every time I've been in school, I feel like I need to hurry up and get this, finish this semester class, this semester, this degree, whatever it is, whatever the milestone is. And my eye is far more focused on that end point, and then you reach the end point, and then inevitably, I don't know that I felt dissatisfied, but it's not the fulfillment that you necessarily imagined. And so I think about that as my default. I think when I read this, it's through the lens of that somewhat default orientation of mine. And so because of that default orientation, when I read this, what I take as a reminder to me is to be less focused on trying to resolve a question about who God is or what God is, to try to formulate, well, which phrase captures it best or articulates it or resolves the full explanation or without any contradiction, etc. And if I can step away from the desire to resolve the currents, the lake in myself with an answer, then I can explore the lake more. And so in a way, I also see that connected to what James is saying, in the sense that for me, there's the journey of the exploration and the engagement that without the pressure of resolving conundrum that may be unresolved. That's one of the ways that I take it, but that's heavily influenced by what I think is some of my own defaults. Well, let's there's this next section that I think might be interesting, which is about avoiding belief. The Quaker way avoids belief. I think we'll do just that very first paragraph and then pause there if anyone wants to read The Quaker way avoids belief.
Quakerism is perhaps unusual in this respect. Most religions or spiritualities set out their beliefs, their doctrines, as a necessary basis for pursuing the path. Quakers take the view that beliefs are not necessary and may even be a hindrance. Quakers are serious about God, certainly, but they do not require belief in God as a starting point, or even as a goal to be aimed at. The question that concerns them is what helps you or hinders you in finding the reality that will enable you to live well. What you believe about the existence and nature of God may make little difference to how you live your life, or it may, if you adhere strongly to the belief. Either way, actually prevent you from experiencing the reality of what you say you believe in. minutes to parse.
Yeah, I did write a question mark.
That either way throws me off. I'm not sure what they're actually saying. So I think it's just, yeah, what you believe, whether you live it out or not, could prevent you from experiencing the reality.
Maybe in either case, better than either way.
Maybe, you can suspend any belief, or at least for a time. I read a passage, maybe heard an interview with Joseph Campbell, and he's at some sort of international religious conference in Japan, and some of you may know this anecdote, and because it was Japan, so they all took a field trip one day to a Shinto shrine, and they talked with and the abbot was there, and the abbot gave them a whole presentation on what Shinto was, the Japanese religion, but and after this is all done, one of the theologians there said, "So, okay, I got what you said and everything, but I still, what is it you believe?" And the Shinto abbot said, "Believe? Mostly we just dance." And, I'm thinking from a Quaker perspective, we said, mostly we just sit around. That's, a way to suspend that as much as you can, Well, I like that idea of believe, And so we've been brought up that you gotta believe. Gotta follow that.
And sometimes we dance.
Sometimes we do.
I think like the first part of that passage is what really that kind of spells out why I'm here in a lot of ways. Because I think I watched my parents church shop for quite many years. My mom grew up Catholic, my dad grew up Baptist, and so they're like, oh, we've got to try and figure out what's going to be our new church that we're going to believe in. So they'd go to one congregation and be like, oh, this is pretty cool. And then they would start not agreeing with something that was in the belief system. But, my mom wasn't Catholic because she was like, I think I should be able to be a priest or a pastor. I think it's strange that I wouldn't be able to. And my dad would. And then so we went to so many different churches. And I think that from a young kid's perspective, I was like, we're all on the same side, right? We all believe in God. We're all here for the same thing. And then eventually, as I got older, they told me, no, they're not here for the same thing as us. They have this belief or that belief. And the more I learned about the world and the more I learned about how many different things people believed about what God is or gods or things, the more I was like, well, am I arrogant enough to believe I was born into the family that got it right, or into the church that got it right? There's so many different things. And so I think what I like about Quakerism is that it doesn't try and pin it down and say, this is right, this is wrong, and everyone else got it wrong, we got it right. And I like the sort of sitting with it and the complexity of it. Yeah, going back to you can't really define, you can define things, but then by defining it, you make it wrong. And so I like the openness that Quakerism has to all of those ideas, and that there might be a seed of truth in all of them. It's probably just a puzzle piece. Something like that.
Still, I'm challenged by the previous paragraph where it's basically covering whether you believe there is a God or you don't believe there is a God. It's missing the point. But also, that's also making a positive statement on the belief in God is missing the point. So if you're saying that we should have no dogma, in some ways, that paragraph is being dogmatic about the existence of God. So maybe it'll be answered further though.
Yeah. I also had that sense when I read that paragraph. It's like, so you're saying that you have it right? We got it wrong. Like, and like when you were saying, it's like, oh well, it's debate. There's no room for debate now. And it's kind of enjoying this.
And maybe that's George Fox's way of telling us the most amount of people that they're wrong. How can I tell the most amount of people that
Yeah.
I think that's right. I think when I read this, like you can definitely walk, like he presents things pretty definitively. I think we all know, obviously, there are Quakers who have a different perspective. I think of, for this avoiding belief, I think about, I don't really know a lot about the Eastern Orthodox tradition, but occasionally what I find interesting about it is, having grown up Catholic and sort of pretty steeped in that, you know, obviously for like 1,000 years, those two churches were a united single church. But then at the point of the separation, it was because of a lot of differences between them. And so like growing up Catholic, you learn the Eucharist and transubstantiation. I don't mean to say this pejoratively, but like, it's a detailed explanation for how divinity enters the forms of bread and wine, and it's explained. Like, this is how it happens. These are the words to describe it. This is the ritual that enables it. This is who is allowed to do it. This is how it's just all these things, right? And I grew up thinking like, okay, like there's this belief, but I also grew up thinking, and it's normal to have the detailed explanation behind the belief. That was just taken for granted. And so when I learned more about the Eastern Orthodox tradition, who also believes in the Eucharist in a very similar way, but they refuse to explain how it happens. So they have no detailed explanation of this. It's just, this happens. We can't explain it. And there's various other things where they took that approach. And I just find that was such a shift for me that was like one of the first places where like that contrast was so profound for me, because it was, I suppose I would say, probably saying it wrongly, a belief in the same thing, but with the refusal to engage in explaining, which was just a very big paradigm shift for me from what I grew up in, where it's detailed, which for me, when I see the contrast, I think, oh yeah, the detailed explanation of it somehow makes it, for me, less believable.
If belief isn't necessary for Quakers, then like I guess it sort of like ask the follow-up question of like what is necessary? Like you don't have belief.
Balance of being Quaker versus not Quaker.
Yeah, sort of like what is the essence, I guess.
I would answer that. Because you know, that's something I think about a lot, what you just said. And to me, it's the practice. Quakers are defined by the processes we use, not necessarily rituals. But of course, any group that, and you know, Quakers like to say we don't have rituals, you know, stuff. But we come here at 11, we sit down, you know, there's even a certain kind of language sometimes you use to express yourself, you know, in business. So of course there are, but the rituals don't, the rituals could change as long as the underlying practice of being together and waiting on something. To me, that's the heart of it. We wait in silence, we wait on something, and so it's more defined. It's like believe, we just dance, you know. Believe, we just sit in silence and we wait, you know. So to me, it's a practice, and because it's a human practice or human process, we can't avoid some kind of ritualization. right, around it, but we'll at least try to be aware of it.
What brought me to Quakerism was because I thought I understood they accepted everybody. To me, it's a piece of God in every person. And so it makes everybody a child of God. And when I was in high school, I lived in an area that was mostly Italian and Irish, which most of the people were Catholic. There was one Quaker girl, and a group surrounded her and were telling her she's going to hell because she wasn't baptized. And I didn't stick up for her back then. And I had to learn over the years, about justice. But the next year, she went to a Quaker boarding school in Philly. So, yeah. But, yeah, I consider myself a Christian Quaker. Somebody else could be a Muslim Quaker, a Jewish Quaker, all this,
Quaker.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah,
Yes. The idea of practice, I was trying to think whether it speaks from belief. And I think you could at least consider the idea that we all have some belief that the practice is useful. We put some faith in it that there's going to be some benefit from doing the practice.
Yeah.
That still feels distinct from the main way belief is being used here, in the sense that it seems more about belief about something like supernatural or divine or something like that. But maybe that's a false distinction. I'm not sure.
I'm sorry, I need to be quiet. I've been talking a lot. But in the original of the New Testament, the word that's used, belief, you need to believe in him and that sort of thing, is also the same word as trust. So, if you kind of move that, shift that meaning just a little bit to one side, maybe trust is a useful.
Let's not panic.
Sort of inversion that happens in Quakerism that the early Quaker movement is so much against forms and like orthopraxy, like having a specific set of liturgies or having a specific sort of way of doing things being what defines it. So much about inward experience as opposed to that. And then strangely though, when we try to define what Quakerism is, all we have is the orthopraxy, the practice, and that's what Quakerism is what the sort of practices we have, which is the very thing it was like trying to break away from, to try to get to sort of an inward communion with God in a sense of that direct, which I think it's just going to be a perennial problem for Quakerism, that if we try to have a religion that's so much based in the interconnection that we have to spirit and to God, that it's being able to say like who is inside and outside of that community of people who are trying to do that, it's never going to be clear who's going to be inside and outside of it, since how am I going to evaluate whether someone is having that experience and really trying to get there with us in a community together? And so the best we can do is probably saying, well, if you show up on Sundays and you're sort of participating in this way and you experience to our sort of set of values, and there are boundaries. We do, I think, have them. Like if someone, I sort of, this is a little bit of a thought experiment, maybe not helpful, but if someone comes in and says, I connect deeply to Mars, the god of war, and I feel that is where I'm being led to this sort of state of that we really need to enhance sort of spiritual purification through violence. That would be like,
Yeah,
we probably would want to, something has gone wrong
yeah.
in this person's spiritual life, and that hasn't happened here, but that is a religious belief that people unfortunately are drawn to. Even within Christianity, there's a sort of sense of purgative violence and sort of a spiritual state of aggression that we are against. But it's going to be, yeah, it'll always be a tricky thing if we're refusing to sort of to explain, to have a set of beliefs, why and how. We just sort of, I guess, have to trust that when people go inwards and they sit in these practices and wait upon the Lord, that they will get what we think at least is the right message, which is to love each other and to try not to do harm.
Yeah.
A little tangential, but you talking about that reminded me the first Quaker thing that I knew about was that Richard Nixon was a Quaker. That was the first thing I heard about Quakerism. I think he just grew up and I don't think he was practicing when he was sending people off to war in Vietnam. But I was wondering if maybe he was excommunicated, or not excommunicated, that's too strong a word, but
Read out of meeting, they called it.
okay, yeah.
Run out of meetings.
Read out of, because they read this person. It's no longer important. A friend of mine who died as a member of this meeting, even though he had moved to Brooklyn many years before. Polly Adams, for those of you who know him, he used to, every once in a while, he'd send me these books he'd find in these old bookshops in New York. And with a humorous, sometimes a little inscription. And he sent me a book once called How the Quakers Invented America. You know, there's that genre of books, how the Irish, created civilization, that kind of thing. So it was How the Quakers Invented America was this book. And so his little inscription was, a more humble people simply would have taken credit for Hoover and Nixon. Because of course Herbert Hoover was a practicing Quaker as president. As I recall, Nixon would every once in a while, when he was doing some horrible thing, would refer to his Quaker roots. And how could I possibly be doing this for a bad motive? I think during the Vietnam War, he talked about Quaker upbringing a little bit. He would refer to it once in a while. Yeah. So, practice. And the other thing I'm thinking about is, we talk about the testimonies. We've all heard that talk, the testimonies of, simplicity, peace, integrity, community, equality, and now stewardship. And that's why they're called testimonies, because we're simply saying, as of right now, our experience, our testimony is that these are things that work. But we aren't saying you got to do this, and you got to do this. This is our experience. This is, in other words, it's not it's still shying away from having a creed or a set of things you got to do. Peace testimony is, right now, this is where we're at. We've always had this experience. And so we're going to continue with it, but it's always something you interrogate.
Yeah.
You don't just sit with it. Okay, this is it. This is the peace testimony. It keeps on evolving.
I think, yeah, I really appreciate you, everything you said, because that, as I approached Quakerism, I was like, so what is, and I would look up the peace testimonies, and then you learn more about what people say about them. Okay, so it's the spices you got. I don't quite know all the peace, integrity, and maybe someone else can fill in. But you have all of those, and I think what I really liked about it is that Quakerism isn't just me believing something. It's me going to a group of people and being I think I believe this, and then people asking questions and trying to interrogate, and figure out. And then as a group, we all have our experience of what we think is reality and true, and it's all different from each other. And so by talking with each other and listening to each other, we get a better sense of what is good for more people than just ourselves. And I think that's part of what being a Quaker is. From what I'm very new to it still. I think that's what draws me to it. It's that it's not just me thinking these things, but me thinking these things with other people and trying with other people.
Which I think is cool. We're at our halfway point, so I think we should take a break, but I do just want to say before we do, that very much resonates for me. It's something that I was going to voice and then you voiced it. I would just say, like, to that question of, for me, right, because obviously I can't speak dogmatically about Quakerism, but I think there is that, for me, that part of it that is, it's a practice together. We just say there's nothing that can be done as an individual. But I find that a distinctive element. We come and sit in silence together. We discern together. And I think for me, there's something very powerful that says something happens when we are together. It's part of why that part about that we named from the last week about my sense of self is also drawn out sort of in connection with others. Like, that's part of why that resonates for me. So I find that for me to be a distinctive part of Quakerism in comparison, let's say, an individual spiritual journey. But let's take a 10-minute break, I suppose, 10 or 12-minute break, and then let's come back at 10:15. So 14 minutes. And there are breakfast snacks and bananas again on the table.
Thanks for facilitating.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Don't worry. I don't know if I was 20 minutes late last week.
Oh, but you were getting us food, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
he was doing the work.
I really appreciate it. Thank you for being.
And then will the recording be online?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll try to watch the second half.
That sounds great.
No, I'm gonna be on the weekend of the 26th, because I'll be on the border delegation.
Yes, you will be gone and I will be gone.
Ooh, so I guess it's me.
I think it's very.
Should read too much.
I'm wondering, if she wants, because I know that she was, going to be doing the one on decision making, I mean, I can do it, but, maybe she wants to do that one there, and maybe switch it.
No,
up.
just switch.
So, do that chapter, and so she can do that.
Yeah.
Because I know she was planning to do that.
Yes, I would be fine with that.
Oh.
I saw your note.
Yeah.
I'm getting married on the 21st, so that's why I was.
I thought it was later for some reason, like the 28th or something. Okay. Oh, no, that's,
So
it's a good reason.
I really cannot be next day.
Yeah.
I need to
Yeah.
remember to announce that this.
Um.
No, otherwise I would be there.
Yeah.
I truly want to go.
Yeah, I'll be interpreting.
That's so great. Well, you were there when I was a member of the Unitarian Church. My minister went, and one of our
I was
Kate Brody,
probably, yes,
and
I
they
was
were
probably,
like detained.
I was not on that.
That my minister was one of the two who were detained, or one of the several who were detained.
We like to call them the Acuna 11.
That's funny.
Yeah, it was pure harassment on the part of the owners of the
That's
Monte
That's good. Understand.
which means, we need to be aware that we're always being watched. Just the way it goes.
You sleepy.
That's fair.
Yeah, they made it into a big legal case, kind of to make a point.
Yeah.
I know I read into something.
Got a lawyer in Mexico.
One of those.
Got established that justice yes, it is okay for profit.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
what are the things that have been so critical to the level of staff to get things get focused. So the TV, yeah, we did. Fire. What do you think for Brad? What I think here. I think where those being here, we
Yes.
I'm guessing this would not. Look at your life. So like the word I hear is job reflection is vision for most houses, but it's all about I was just thinking about like another thing. Now we have, are you on self-love things, self-love drawings? Definitely looks, it's not like a personal line, but there you can walk around there.
Yeah.
It's very much like that.
Yeah, I was wondering if that was.
Sorry, we're excited.
That's too like.
Yeah.
And that was a definitely not the
Yeah, I think we got it from native state. You know, like state. Yeah, we got it. So I think it. They make it easy. Plan is that you're ordering more state. I think I should.
Speak up, and maybe it's much smaller.
Yeah, like a 30 or 40 bag here. What's that?
Oh,
I think it's just.
Yeah. Every green
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. It's hard to get started.
This goes in whichever side you stand. I don't know how they got your address. A bill to go into the collection. What's your living situation? And the corporate doesn't make. Let's not assume it's not. Like, not when they lowered it, because when I looked online, it said it was full, and it was 139, but I thought, oh, that's good, I'm gonna go in and ask. He said, oh, yeah, we got room.
There's not a lot of lots, it's really perfect.
Somebody asked me, there's second is way out in the country, and I can drive that one in the dark. Yeah, I need a shower. She like some oil in the water. I didn't take it.
Way that they go building. Look at this one. Why? It's like going on
and sit down and go through all of
usually they're more.
bills. Just to, see, let me tell you, since I was evicted, these, major corporations have had the hand for 7 years. The department.
Yeah.
I think it's getting nursing jobs, and I started driving DoorDash, Lyft. Yeah. And there's some apartments not the same complex, except for like a sliding scale for people with low income. One girl even told me she was moving and I could get her apartment, but the manager there was like, there's nothing here for you. Kind of attitude. And when I had gone to Jones and
I told folks we're starting off again. Here I am.
This isn't about.
It is. It is. Well, yeah. I do.
Thank you.
Rachel was like, it sounds so nice to get married with like a small group of people, very light on ceremony. Just show up and it's just like, okay, we're getting married. Here are your vows. Okay, good. Okay. Great job, everyone.
Yeah, we were a little nervous since our families are Quaker, whether they would like.
Have they-
They did great. I was so I'm so happy. They like a lot of them offered vocal ministry and they spoke, and it was just people really embraced it and went with the whole style and meeting.
It's hard to be like so much. It would certainly save like a lot of money for a wedding. It's like, we're doing a Quaker wedding. People are like, what does that mean? Yeah, to be
Which makes
comfortable with the experience. Yeah. Thing like what simplicity means in like the Quaker tradition. Like, does that mean like cheap, or just does it mean like?
That's I don't. It's kind of like the peace testimony. You kind of keep having to figure out what it means.
What that means to you? What is
what it means.
Terry Sorrell has this saying, he says, if you think you understand the peace testimony, you don't. You know, then you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Your work, I feel like really come I like you just the pretty good Quaker aesthetic. Natural.
Kind of like, I don't know what God is. I know that it is who they are.
Well, she's a foreigner.
Back to like the like, oh, I am. And then
Oh, there you
all
go.
you need to know.
Books in your library.
Yep. I think it's pretty informal. You just go in there and there might be some cards out there, something where you just write down. Your name.
Is that okay?
Oh yeah, no. I was just trying to explain the library system. If you look,
Oh, yeah,
at these
you-
books-
can you
are
explain
these
it?
from the library? So they will have this blue card in them, and you fill out the date and the borrower's name, and you put it in a little box that you will see in the library. And so then that is our official system for registering that.
Do you know how you return them?
No.
Okay. I figured out how to return. So I have 3 books that are like stacked.
My guess would be you take the little card and you just put it back in,
Oh, okay.
and then or maybe leave it on the cart or put it on the shelf. I'm not sure actually. They should probably
Yeah.
ask the library committee.
Or there's a cart where I think people put books and then they don't have the time to find the card.
And there's a surprisingly quite a bit of content under the chapter looking for God.
One second. If I could add, if everybody could speak a little bit louder and maybe a little bit slower, and then everybody can hear a little bit better. That's all right, just as a reminder. Thanks.
And-
Second that.
and
Thank you for saying that.
speak maybe to the microphones also.
But still make eye contact with her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Head up high and look at everybody.
I think what I'm gonna recommend is that I'm just gonna very quickly read from the next 2 pages, and then we'll sort of dive more deeper into page 36. But I think what's really important on the next couple pages is these words from George Fox: silence all presumptuous talkers of God who see him not. And then it goes on to talk intelligently about God. When they have no direct experience of God, they have to use images and ideas which they and others are already somewhat familiar with. And then it quotes extensively, and I just think we can always come back to it, but from Samuel Fisher, a contemporary of Fox. And they're going on in more discussions about the challenge of trying to understand God intellectually, but they talk more about the sense of feeling God, knowing God, seeing God. And so that section ends with these questions. How then are they supposed to know this truth for themselves to gain this feeling or sense of God as Fisher describes it? Fisher points us initially to something inside us, something apparently quite meager. God manifests something of himself in every conscience. But that will tell us only about ourselves, surely. Exactly. But that is where we have to begin. So I'm wondering if someone can, if someone would read aloud the first paragraph of drawing awareness, and then maybe we can sort of look at the next couple pages and see what sticks out to any of us.
But the experience of the light does not immediately bring us to an experience of God. It is initially a down-to-earth experience of ourselves, though drawing on an awareness that seems to come from outside ourselves. And it is where we need to begin. As the early friends made quite clear, we cannot advance in our spiritual life until we have come to terms with our present experience of life. But when we do get a sense of ourselves as we are, we then begin to get a sense of God. Fox made that clear in an early tract from about 1654. A word from the Lord to all of the world. So God Almighty opens your understandings, all people everywhere, that you may see yourselves. And if you take heed to that light which will exercise your conscience, it will let you see yourselves, which I is the light. And this light will let you see God. That needs to be emphasized today because friends sometimes have an easy way of speaking about God, which hasn't come to terms with the difficulty, the obstacle to our getting out of our egos. It is sometimes said that if we come to meeting and sit in silence, we can then experience God directly. This is what the German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer called cheap grace. It doesn't, of course, happen like that, so friends can get very disappointed and discouraged. But there is a Quaker way of looking for God, though it is sometimes dark and difficult. And if we follow that way, we will surely experience what we feel we most need to know. Should I keep going? Moreover, when we do begin to get a sense of God, we realize that it is quite different from what our previous idea of God might have led us to expect. This kind of reality will not fit into our ready-made concepts. And what started off perhaps as an intellectual quest will turn out to be something quite different. Yet the growing awareness that comes from waiting in the light will give us a new understanding, which will help us to address those intellectual difficulties we might have started off with. Listen to Samuel Fisher again, that early friend who had engaged in a serious intellectual quest before becoming a Quaker, and was therefore able to see how intellectual quest could be resolved in experience.
Thank you, Jason. And then I wonder if we could each just sort of scan and look at the next couple pages between where James left off and the middle of page 40. So before speaking of God, and just see if anything stands out to us that we want to point out, or anything what James has read that we want to point out.
Portion that says sometimes, it is sometimes said that if we come to a meeting and sit in silence, we can then experience God directly. And then that's called cheap grace. I was trying to reconcile those two things because the idea of cheap grace makes it sound like something is being gotten, some sort of thing that resembles grace is being gotten by sitting in meeting. But this cheap is like not the full authentic thing. But then it talks about getting disappointed and discouraged, which makes it seem like maybe people come expecting some sort of grace and then don't have it, which feels different to me. Like, so I'm trying to understand exactly what they're referring to here as this thing that's not really you need to be going for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that section also puzzled me a bit. And if it's helpful, one thing that I think is noteworthy is, so Dietrich Bonhoeffer, when he says cheap grace, is not talking about Quaker side, like he was a German, maybe not Lutheran, but Lutheran adjacent. And he was speaking in the middle of the Second World War. And what I read when he says cheap grace is, when he's talking about cheap grace, was like people who felt like I can just believe in God and I don't need to do anything to respond to the atrocities of Nazism and genocide and the Holocaust. And there was this cheap grace of, as long as I confess belief, I'm saved. And so he called that a cheap grace, to act as though there's nothing required of us. And I feel like that context of what Bonhoeffer was talking about might illuminate a little bit how it might be more, what cheap grace might look like in a Quaker context.
I see.
Yeah, there's an interesting, Bonhoeffer went to jail for trying a plot to try to kill Hitler. And I think he ended up dying
Yeah.
in jail. But that's an interesting fact about Bonhoeffer.
I feel like in the Quaker concept, how I read that, it might not be accurate to what his intention was, but that sometimes you can have sort of like a mystical or ecstatic experience that's very satisfying to you, and you feel like God has spoken to you, and it's rather than being something that like leads out into the difficult work of living, it's almost like a drug or something that you want to go back to, and you're like, yes, I want that. Like I feel like God's talking to me. I need to get that. I feel like that to me seems like what the sort of Quaker version of cheap grace might be. That you have this feeling of transcendence that doesn't actually have any substance to it. And that you sort of want, and then you feel disappointed when you don't get that every time, rather than actually having to wade through the problems of living.
I totally agree with that.
I think in meeting, you get a feeling of the community, like a good vibe. I don't know what to call it. I mean, is it the light within or whatever but I guess do people get that other places too when they're not in the community?
That's the, like, kind of goes to the scripture that says, you don't need to be just continuing, paraphrasing, to feed on milk, and to stay at the milk phase and, go and have, this good feeling, sing your songs and do your prayers, feel good when you leave that you did this good thing. And yet the thing transforms in your life after that, that's cheap, you just felt good. Okay, great. I'm glad you felt good, that's sweet. But what change in the world did you create because of that good feeling? What did you give to others as a result? What did you change in yourself that really makes a difference? Which I think that's the hard work.
Mm-hmm.
What's the definition of a gathered meeting? Is that what a gathered meeting is? Do you have the definition of that? Gathered meeting? What is it?
I think the original use of the term, and maybe one of you can, you know, those of us who've been here a while can fill me in if I don't use this term correctly. The idea that there's a sense that comes over a silent meeting that somehow we've all gotten to the same place together in the silence. Maybe with the help of some messages, but it's a sense of something that can happen in a meeting for worship. I mean, I don't know if someone else wants to elaborate on that. I'm looking at people who've been here longer than I have, been around longer than I have, or people who are very experienced who've been around a while too. So, no one wants to.
One of the ways I've seen what I consider a gathered meeting is when you're sitting there and you're really working with something and you're really feeling this inside. And then you stand up and you say the words in such a much better way than I was saying it. It expresses it. And then maybe another 15, 30 minutes goes by and another message takes what I was thinking and what you were thinking and pulls it into a direction that maybe, that really enlightens the whole thing. And it just grows from there. And I've seen it. Yeah, I mean, there's times that I know that's what happened. There's a lot of times it happens and I'm clueless and I'm, my brain's over here and not, in here or right here or whatever. But when that happens, I think that's part of the gathering. Where we're really listening and listening to the Spirit when there's silence. You can feel that. And even when you walk in the door late, you can feel it. Sometimes you walk in, it just feels like a bunch of people. Other times, it's something more. And that's that something more that we can't define.
I like on page 40 that it says it still cannot be described rationally because it goes beyond the world of people and things that our reason is designed to cope with. They will be confident in their knowledge nonetheless because they are immediately aware of it, rather as they are intimately aware of themselves and those whom they love.
And that comes from Fisher's 3 points that begins on 38. His advice to the doubters of his time is to refer them to the advice they are already being given in their consciences, if only they would listen to it. So they have to sit still, pay attention to what their conscience is telling them, whether good or bad, and let the light in the conscience show them what is really going on in their life. What will this do for them? He is suggesting 3 things it will do for them. Then that's from the third of those 3 items. Which I think is from them, many of us have named. Like I think, Elia, you were speaking to the second point. this practice, the second thing this practice will do for them is inspire them to live more in harmony with this truth and love they have found within them. They will recognize their normal way of life as relatively selfish and uncaring, but this inner light is so affirming and liberating when it is taken seriously that they will want to make that the center of their lives. Now, else stand out to us from those 3 points?
So I worry I might be missing the forest for the trees here. I'm also hesitant to like be like hunting for possible contradictions. But for me, like I'm trying to like unify what's in here into like a consistent message. So just above what had just been read, it talks about so this is still in the third point, the summary of the third point. Because your own divided self, even a little further. As they grow up, they get to become like their parents, at least as they knew them when young. A little further, they get to understand who their parents were and are. So Fisher is saying to his readers, because your own divine self has come to life, you will know intuitively from experience what God is. So it's like very strongly leaning on this metaphor. At least for the writing of like God being similar to it, also that we can become more godlike. But then Fox on page 36 and on page 34 was talking about, and yet you and your foolishness, darkness and ignorance go make an image of the incomprehensible God. And so you will comprehend him in the fashion of a man. And to me, these seem like very strongly in conflict. This idea that we should not be using our limited imaginations to say there is this person-like entity, God, that is like a man, but we're just gonna kind of turn the dials up on some of the things that we like about certain types of people, and make that into God. At least that's my interpretation. But then the part we just read seems to be very strongly leaning on this idea that we can be similar to God, which again seems to rely on the idea that God is this person-like thing, not like just not an energy or something like that. Anyway, I don't know if anyone has thoughts on reconciling that. I know other people have mentioned like sometimes it's good to just like sit with the contradictions and not try to resolve them. But that's jumped out to me.
I definitely welcome people's thoughts. I think the next section, speaking of God, will
address some of that.
I'd be very interested. Would you be willing to start us off in reading that section, speaking of God?
Sure. The first advice then is to follow the advice we are already being given in our conscience. It is an invitation to explore the possibilities of our own present experience of life, including our negative experiences of anxiety, guilt, and uncertainty. There's also a promise that if we venture on the path, we will discover the huge positive of awareness and faith. Would it help to evoke that experience if we were to try and describe it? Possibly. There is a risk that any such description might be taken as a belief, an idea that could be detached from the experience and regarded as true in itself. It would then defeat its purpose. But if it is taken as an expression or interpretation of the experience, it could indeed be helpful. We Quakers have a word for such talk, as we shall see later on. It is testimony. Our talk about God and other mysteries of life has the character of testifying to our experience of these things.
Maybe skip to this is from Anthony Benezet, maybe to that paragraph and read that paragraph in the following one. Would that be okay?
Yeah, that's just paragraph.
Okay.
Yes.
The I know.
Yes.
I know something great advantage will arise from people's having what are called right ideas of God, and that those opinions are productive of much tenderness and charity in the minds of such who adopt them. But has this indeed been the case?
Had the meekness and gentleness of Christ been more apparent in those who have been zealous advocates for this opinion than in other people? Ideas, however exalted they may appear, except impressed on the mind by truth, are still but bare ideas and can have no influence in subduing that love of the world, that carnality of the mind, that obduracy of the heart, and principally that poisonous idolatry of self, so apt, under one subtle form or another, to insinuate itself even into the hearts of such as have already made some good advances in religion.
Then it continues. William Penn, a century before, was similarly skeptical about right ideas of God. Behind such ideas he could see was the mistaken idea that truth could finally be established in a set of words. Words were not fitted for this purpose. To get to the truth, we had to let go of words and learn a different language, a language of spirit. But having heard that language, we might, after all, be able to say something about it in human words, as Penn does here in his aphoristic sayings on our knowledge of God. And I would invite us to just scan through 508 through 512 and then any of our reactions to what we've just read.
Was soll ich noch? I'd like to add a quote by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He said, "A God who is not."
My feeling is what you're saying there, Brad, about the that seeming sort of tension and contradiction between, on the one hand, sort of having an experience of God and allowing that to sort of shape and transform ourselves inwardly, sort of leading outwardly to testimonies, and the ever-present danger of sort of self-idolization and forming a self that's you hold something as like, I've got it, I've made this perfect moral being in myself that I can now point to as the like thing that I am going to worship and hold up as the this is what God is. I don't, yeah, I think that that's just an ever-present in the project, is finding that sort of creating those sort of idols, and that it's just something to sort of constantly, perhaps that's sort of overly torturous path. I'm not sure if people have other ways around that, but that we should try to live within that, but at the same time not form the idol is the difficulty of that path.
Sort of like the idea of like a divine truth. And sort of like if like you experience some knowledge or something that you know to be true and good, then you're like, okay, this is true and good. But the moment you like, that truth is going to change over time. So then like, you're like, okay, I'm going to tape this and it's never going to change again. But then if you try and hold on to that, over time, that truth will no longer be true. And but if you keep following it, you'll just like go off the path that was originally set before you. And you have to try and come back to that path, which means leaving behind the truth and finding a new truth, which sounds difficult.
This section seems like it's interesting. It's more of a is for Quakers. It's more about the experience of God, which is an ongoing thing. It's deeply personal.
We're almost at the end of our time, and there's so much still in this chapter. I just want to read this last paragraph and then invite any closing thoughts. We could summarize our discussion so far by saying, this is page 43, by saying that we gain a sense of God first by becoming aware of a depth in ourselves that connects us with something beyond the range of our ego and ego-based concepts, that of God within us. And secondly, by experiencing the transformation that takes place when we open ourselves to what this deep self will reveal to us. We see ourselves as we are, broken and conflicted, yet find ourselves being healed and restored as we accept this truth about ourselves, not immediately perhaps, but surely and steadily as we continue to open ourselves to reality. We are not sure how all this happens. We are confident that some reality in and around us knows very well what is going on and cares sufficiently to mend us and make us whole. We have to say this, if we are honest, because when we faced reality at last, we found it didn't hurt. On the contrary, we have been made happy and whole by it. The experience of being made whole by opening ourselves to the truth conveys a deep message to us. Ultimately, reality is loving. Any closing thoughts from anyone in our last few minutes?
I love the phrase reality is loving.
What's that?
I love the phrase reality is loving.
I'm delighted by how often we ask questions and or people will say something and then we'll read the very next paragraph and it'll be essentially distilling kind of what we're all asking each other and going to. And I think that's kind of, I don't know, it just feels more true to like that someone else who wrote this book and talked with other people and echoed all of these ideas came up with similar questions and things. And so I don't know, there's something there. Like, and I like the phrase, but surely and steadily as we continue to open ourselves to reality, we're kind of like, we're staying open. And I like that.
I wonder on that theme if the next, or I don't remember what happens next in the book, but the idea that reality is loving, it sort of leads to the next question about, well, so what about all the suffering and evil in the world? And that's sort of big theodicy. I'm not sure if that's something that Rick Sambler talks about at all, but that is, I feel like, the next question that I have after reading that.
We wanted to reread for next week. Is it chapter 3? Does anyone know? It will be.
Or is pre-reading discouraged?
All things are sacred mysteries.
Yeah.
We have some,
Schedule.
we have some plans and we may shift the plans.
We're not meeting next week.
Right.
Oh, really?
Singing meeting is next.
Singing meeting next week. So, but the week after, so maybe we can get out the word. Maybe we can get out the word.
Yeah.
About which chapter we'll be
Yes.
doing on the weekend of the 22nd.
Right. The next time we meet is the 22nd. The original plan was meeting others. We may switch it.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
we stick with our original plan, it will be the next chapter.
We realize that only Mary will be in town
That week.
and
So we're at time now. So thank you everyone for joining us. I'll just close this with the very last words on, there's still a few very interesting things remaining in the chapter if you have time to look at it. But I'll just close this with where he ends. We may still have differences of language, of course, and some people may still be uncomfortable about using the word God with all its heavy associations. They will find other ways to express themselves and not go unheard. So they will feel free to hear others who still find that word evocative and powerful. The purpose of words in our spiritual life, as Isaac Pennington once memorably put it, is to bring men and women to the knowledge of things beyond what words can utter.